Good morning. Welcome to another beautiful day that the Lord has made. This is the day that the Lord has made, and we should rejoice and be glad in it. I am Pastor Ronald Embry, pastor of the Agape Christian Church, located at 3021 Turner Street in the city of Lansing. I want to take this opportunity before we go into our Sunday school lesson, which is taught by Deacon John Strudwick. I want to tell you today, please come. You still have time to get ready. Morning worship starts at 11 a.m. Please come and be our guest this morning as we have a guest speaker, Evangelist Michelle Willis out of Flint, Michigan. Looking for you to be here today. God bless you. God love you. And to all the mothers, we're wishing you, the Agape Christian Church is wishing you a happy Mother's Day. God bless you. At this time, we will enter into the Sunday school lesson with Deacon John Strudwick. God bless you.
We'd like to say praise the Lord to everyone. We're going to begin our Sunday school lesson for today. And our Sunday school lesson today is entitled, let me turn away from it. Okay, Solomon dedicates the temple. This also known as Solomon's Temple. Now, it's taken from 2 Chronicles, the 7th chapter, verses 1 through 7, and verse 11 of this 2 Chronicles. Now, the author of Chronicles, 1st and 2nd, is Ezra. Ezra was a prominent priest. And the 2nd chapter of Chronicles, that is Chronicles 2, deals primarily with the southern kingdom, that is Judah. Now, as you know, that the kingdom was united under 3 kings, that is Saul, the first king, David being the second king, and Solomon, the third king of united Israel. Now, after Solomon, the kingdom was divided. You had the northern kingdom, which was Israel, and you had the southern kingdom, which was Judah. Now, the divided kingdom existed for many years. And then the northern kingdom, actually, went away. And then the southern kingdom existed many years after the northern kingdom had been destroyed. Now, the 2 Chronicles deals with Solomon's reign all the way to the Babylonian exile. Now, it says Solomon dedicates the temple. Now, we're talking about Solomon's temple. That was David's son. Now, it was David's idea to construct the temple. Now, it was David's plan. He had the idea, had the blueprint, and David gathered all the material. But the Lord did not want David to build the temple because David was a man of war, okay? So he allowed his son Solomon, he told him, your son Solomon will build the temple. And because Solomon was a man of peace, during Solomon's reign, Israel was at rest. Israel was at peace. So David was a man of war, so he was not allowed, but his son Solomon was. And Solomon was the one that oversaw the building of the temple. Okay, so let's look at, let's identify the outlines. We have 3 outlines. The first outline is glory of God. That's in verses 1 through 3. The second outline is worship by the people, 4 through 6. This is all from the second chapter of Chronicles. And the third outline is action by Solomon, verses 7 and verse 11. Okay, so let's go back to our first set of scriptures. Our first outline here is glory of God. This is 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. Now, the first verse, 1a, let's just deal with 1a first. Okay, go ahead.
Now, when Solomon had made an end of praying, the fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offerings and the sacrifices.
Okay, now let's talk about a few chapters in 2 Chronicles before we get to the 7th chapter. Now, in chapters 4 through 5, we see that, as I said, Solomon, David's son, the third king of United Israel, oversaw the building of the temple, the construction. And in chapters 4, 5, 6, you see the temple being built and the furnishing being moved into the temple. And this is in chapters 4 and 5. The ark moved in, and we see the temple completed. Temple was completed. So, in chapter 6, this lesson starts in chapter 7, but in chapter 6, it's the latter part of chapter 6, you'll see Solomon's prayer. You can read that. And the chapter 6, I'm not exactly sure where it starts, but it starts in the latter part of chapter 6 of 2 Chronicles, where it'll say Solomon's prayer. So when it goes into chapter 7, it says, now when Solomon had made an end to the praying. So at the conclusion of Solomon's prayer, this is where our lesson takes up. When Solomon had finished his prayer in the 6th chapter. Now, he prayed that, okay, he prayed for mercy, he prayed for forgiveness, he prayed for guidance, and he prayed for hearing. He said, whenever people come to this place and pray, he asked the Lord to hear them. So this was Solomon's prayer. So when he ended the prayer, so the subject is dedicating the temple. The temple has been completed, the furnishing moved in, and now comes the dedication of the temple. Solomon's prayer, when he ended his prayer, okay, and you read the fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifice. Now, our lesson talks about 3 kinds of fire. Now, one is a fire of judgment. Now, this is not the type of fire that came down. Then you have a fire of approval. And then you have a fire of testing. So the type of fire came down was a fire of approval. Basically, and we're gonna let's read the 1b, the latter part of 1.
And the glory of the Lord filled the house.
Okay, so the presence of the Lord filled the entire temple to the point that what happened? Verse 2.
And the priest could not enter into the house of the Lord because the glory of the Lord had filled the Lord's house.
Okay, so here's the idea. Solomon offers the prayer of dedication, and the Lord approved of the temple. And how did he do so? The glory of the Lord filled the entire building, the entire temple, to the point that the priest could not even enter because the presence of the Lord was so great, which the glory of the Lord filled the house. The presence of the Lord was so great that the priest could not enter into the temple. So the temple. So basically, this outline here is the temple was accepted. The Lord approved. You remember, David had this idea, I want to build you a house. No, David, no, I don't want you to build a house because you're a man of war. You have blood on your hand. Your son, Solomon, which is a man of peace. And as I said, Solomon was the third king of united Israel. After that, the kingdom was split. Southern kingdom, which was Judah, the northern kingdom, which was Israel. Okay, so the third king, Solomon, he, man of peace, he was given the responsibility of building, and he oversaw the temple, and now we come to the dedication. And we see the fire came down from heaven. God's presence was there. It filled the entire house, okay? So basically it's saying, I approve everything that you've done. Now, the temple was built. We're not going to go into the construction. You can go read Chronicles, and it was, the God is instructed how to be done. But everything was done in order. Everything was done in order, and God approved of the temple. And he showed up. His presence was so strong in that temple. Okay, now, verse 3, what was the people's reaction?
And when all the children of Israel saw how the fire came down and the glory of the Lord upon the house, they bowed themselves with their faces to the ground, upon the pavement, and worshiped and praised the Lord, saying, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever.
Okay, now this was the people's response to, because if they were there, they saw the fire came down, consume, it said, consume the burnt offering and the sacrifices. We're going to get to the number of sacrifices that were given, but when they saw that the Lord had approved, they worshiped. They bowed themselves down in submission. They bowed in submission. That was the people's response. So basically, the first outline is God, basically, it says glory of God, but it's God approved the temple. It was completed and it was dedicated by Solomon, and this is a temple dedication, and it was a celebration. Now, the second outline is worship by people, and that's verses 4 through 6. And let's do 4 and 5.
Then the king and all the people offered sacrifices before the Lord. And King Solomon offered a sacrifice of 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. So the king and all the people dedicated the house of God.
Okay, now, and the lesson gives a description here, a diagram here of how the size of King Solomon's sacrifice as compared to other kings. Hezekiah, Josiah. Remember, Josiah was a good king. Hezekiah was a good king. Now, we're talking about the kings of Judah now. Okay, now Josiah was the last good king of Judah. There were more bad kings, put it this way, than there were good. But they compare Solomon and Hezekiah and Josiah. Solomon dedicated, it said 22,000 oxen, cattle, sheep and goats, 120, versus Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a good king. Hezekiah sacrificed 2,008 oxen, cattle, and sheep and goat. He sacrificed 17,000. And Josiah, as I said, the last good king of Judah, he sacrificed 11,000 sheep, oxen, and cattle, All of those pale in comparison to the number that David, that Solomon sacrificed. Okay. Now, as you know, that Israel wanted a king. This was on a united Israel. And God said, well, no, you don't need a king. I'm your king. And they said, no, we want a human king. So God, he gave in, and he gave them, it's like people say, well, be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. And he told them what the consequences, but they wanted a king anyway. So they got Saul. Now, Saul was a big man. He was a big man in stature. That's what they want. Like people say, we want tall, dark, and handsome. That might not be what you need, but that's what you want. And if you want it bad enough, you just might get it. And they got it. And Saul was not a good king. But now David was a man small in stature, because we find that out because he, Saul wanted to give him his armor to fight Goliath. He said, no, I don't want that. I mean, it's too big anyway, and not even tested. But the idea that David was a man after God's own heart. So they got a good king. So now let's look at that was the amount of the sacrifices that David made. Now 6 talks about the music, and it just basically kind of a historical point. Talk about, let's just read that. It's just talking about. Let's read 6A and B.
And the priests waited on their offices. The Levites also with instruments of music of the Lord, which David the king had made to praise the Lord, because his mercy endureth forever. When David praised by their ministry. And the priests sounded trumpets before them, and all Israel stood.
Now, this outline here, not outline, but this section here is talking about the music. Now, we know that the Levites were in charge of the music. Now, they were priests as well. Now, not all the Levites were priests, but they came from the tribe of Levi. Okay, but they was in charge of the music. That's why it's talking about the music. It's talking about the instruments that David made. So it was like a celebration. And obviously, that is just like most churches have, a lot of churches now have music ministry. They're in charge of the music. So the Levites, well, if you want to put it that way, they was in charge of the music ministry. That's all that's saying. That's what the Levites one of their responsibilities. And it also said the priests had trumpets as well. The priests sounded the trumpets, and all Israel stood. In other words, it was a celebration for all Israel, not just the Levites. The Levites were just in charge of the music, basically. But all Israel celebrated this fact that God have accepted the temple. Go ahead. Mm.
One for basically like the call to worship,
Mm.
so you're usually together,
Mm.
and then the other for war.
Mm.
And they used the ram's horn,
Right.
and which was some people still use it. You blow into it and it
Mm.
makes noise.
Right.
But for everybody to stand for worship, basically.
Right.
And thanks to God, I guess they were silver trumpets.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing about it is that most of those instruments were created by King David.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what they said. It says, which David, the king, had made.
Yeah.
Now he said, why mention David? That was his thing. David was responsible for that. Okay, so we see this celebration because this is a major project here. That is the completion of the temple at Jerusalem and the dedication, the Lord accepted this, and we see this by the Lord showing up, as we read. The glory of the Lord filled the entire temple. The presence of the Lord filled the entire place. Now, okay, we get into our third outline is actions by Solomon. Okay, you got to read 7.
Moreover, Solomon hallowed the middle of the court that was before the house of the Lord, for there he offered burnt offerings, and the fat of the peace offerings, because the brazen altar which Solomon had made was not able to receive the burnt offerings, and the meat offerings, and the fat.
Okay, now, what are we talking about here? Now, the temple, and they had an altar, we call it a brazen altar, for sacrifices. Now, if we look back to the size of the sacrifices, the number, it tells you right in verse 7, it said in verse 7, probably the third clause, or the middle of let's say the middle of 7, because the brazen altar which Solomon had made was not able to receive the burnt offering. So it's like you having an event, and we're going to have it indoors. But it's so big, we got to take it outside. And so what Solomon did, he hallowed. See, hallowed, the third word there. Moreover, Solomon hallowed. He sanctified the outer court, the courtyard, to accommodate, that's basically all it said, to accommodate these celebrations. Because we already just read that how many more Solomon offered in what, 2-3 times more than any other king that they mentioned. I would imagine that the other kings even offered less. So he offered 22,000 oxen, sheep. The only one that came close was 11,000, was Josiah, and so he offered more than half what Josiah did, and probably about 10 times more than Hezekiah. So that's all it's saying. So the Solomon hallowed or sanctified the outer court, the courtyard, to accommodate this offering. Now on the altar. Now, a little bit of history back. Now we had this lesson about two Sundays ago, where David made his sacrifice, and we talked about Abraham sacrifice of his son, attempt to sacrifice his son Isaac. Okay, now it goes back to Abraham was commanded to go and offer up his son Isaac. Where? If we go to Genesis, I believe it's 22 and 2. Genesis 22 and 2. It says, then he said, this is God talking to Abraham. He said, take thy son, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah. Okay, and there offer him a burnt offering upon one of the mountains. Now, so Abraham was told to offer up his son Isaac on one of the mountains in the Mount Moriah area. Now, when they went up there and they had the party that accompanied them, that is Abraham and Isaac, and the party, he told them, he said, well, you wait here. Me and the boy, we're going to go up, and we're going to come back. Now, and Isaac, I don't know how old he was, but he understood about sacrifice. And he said, well, it was an altar now. It's on a mountain. And it's Mount Moriah. And he said, well, okay, we're up here. I see the altar. I see the wood. But where is the sacrifice? And Abraham said, the Lord will provide. Now, we know in this instant, Isaac was not sacrificed. There was a ram and it caught in the thicket, and that ram was a substitute for Isaac's life. Now, it was twofold when Abraham said, the Lord will provide. This statement by Abraham, the Lord will provide, was pointing to, who do you think that was pointing to? Only Isaac? It was pointing to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was the lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world to take away sin. So the fact that when Abraham said the Lord will provide, it was not only referring to the ram that would be a substitute, but the lamb that would be a substitute for our sin. That is Jesus Christ. Now, so Abraham was to offer up his son on the altar, and that was in the Mount Moriah area. So, and now we had another lesson. It was a couple of Sundays ago, and it was talking about David's sacrifice. Now, if we go back to that lesson, and it was in First Chronicles. First Chronicles, the 21st chapter, and with verse 18. And when I was teaching that lesson, I made a point that, okay, let's look at that. The angel of the Lord commanded Gad, now Gad was a prophet, Gad to say to David. Now this is the David sacrifice. So we see now that Abraham's sacrifice was to sacrifice his son, but there was a ram, and the ram was substituted, and that was on what? Mount Moriah. Okay? We just read that in Genesis. Now we go to 2 Chronicles. This is David's sacrifice. And verse 18 said, if you have it, you can read it. If you don't, I'll read it. Verse 18, 1 Chronicles, 21st chapter. Then the angel, we had that a week or so ago. Then the angel of the Lord commanded Gad, that is the prophet, to say to David, and David should go set up an altar unto the Lord and the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And I mentioned that. Now, that was because that David had sinned because of numbering the people, that is, the fighting men. And the plague had came. And you know, the plague had came, and this was to stop the plague, because the angel, we talked about, the angel was getting ready to destroy Jerusalem. They had already started the destroying process, and the angel had the sword drawn over Jerusalem. Now, and you might think, okay, Jerusalem, we're going to get to that a little bit later too. Okay, so in verse 18 of the 1 Chronicles 21, the angel of the Lord commanded Gad to say to David, and David should go up and set up an altar unto the Lord in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Now, and he was a threshing floor is always up on a mountain. Now, and we talked about it. David, he said, "Well, you can have it." David said, "No, it won't be no sacrifice if I get it for free." But this threshing floor, I think I said then that this is important. This threshing floor was on the top of, was in the Mount Moriah area. So it's the same general area, not necessarily the same spot, but the same general area that Abraham offered his son. The ram was a substitute for, was acted as a substitute, just like Christ is our substitute. Okay, and Isaac lived. So now we see David erects an altar on the threshing floor, which was Mount Moriah. Okay, you see the pattern here? Mount Moriah. Okay, so that was significant there. Now, if you think about it, Jerusalem, anybody know where Jerusalem was built? I mean, not Jerusalem, but Solomon's temple was built? Can you guess? Mount Moriah. Solomon's temple. Okay, so the idea now Jesus Christ, when I said earlier about when Abraham said to his son, the Lord will provide, the Lord did provide a ram as a substitute, but that had a much larger view, is that the Lord will provide, referring to the Lamb of God, referring to Jesus Christ, who would sacrifice himself, would be a substitute for our sins. Okay, so that was the significance of Mount Moriah. Now, Mount Moriah, the area is like when you view it. I've never been there, but I've seen pictures. It's an area, and if you've seen mountains, you have larger mountains, you have higher mountains too. Okay, so this whole area of Mount Moriah. Now we know that Christ was crucified in that general area. Now we call it Calvary, or the place of skulls. Okay, in a similar spot. So this whole point, like you talk about the Old Testament, the whole thing of the Lord providing a substitute, it started with Abraham offered his son Isaac on the same mountain. As I said, the ram was a substitute, and it spared Isaac life. Okay, David was instructed to buy this threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, which was Mount Moriah. The temple, Solomon's temple was constructed on that area. Now, we know that the temple was destroyed, but it was rebuilt by Zerubbabel. Remember, they came back and they rebuilt the temple. Now, it didn't have the magnificence, because some people was happy, some people was not so happy, because it didn't have the splendor of Solomon's temple. And then they did more work on the temple as well even after Zerubbabel did his work. So the thing is that all of this makes sense. Christ was our sacrifice. He was the substitute that the ram supplied, and as for Abraham's sacrifice, and we have David erecting an altar. David's altar is on that area. Like I said, maybe not the same spot, but in that general area. I think they said Mount Moriah is mentioned not a whole lot of times in the Bible. It's mentioned in Genesis, a couple of chapters, a couple of places in Genesis. But it's the region. I think we looked at it. I looked at it in Genesis. It was 22 and 18. Look at it again. Genesis 22. Let's look at it again. Look at it again. And he said, "Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, which thou lovest, and go into the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one." You see what it said? One of the mountains. So it was an area. It was, it said one of the mountains. So it was that Mount Moriah area, just like you said, well, the city of Detroit or whatever. So that was the place that it was Mount Moriah area, and that's where David was instructed to build an altar there. That's where Jebusite. That's where the threshing floor was in that particular area of Mount Moriah. Okay, so back to verse 7. We read that already. Now this celebration, that is the celebration of the dedication of the temple, lasted the temple dedication lasted for 7 days. And after the 7 days, there was a 7-day celebration. And after that 7-day celebration was the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles was another 7-day celebration. So the celebration that happened in verse 7, that occurred for 7 days. And then it was the altar dedication. The dedication of the altar was not just a 1-day affair, it was a 7-day affair. And after that 7-day celebration was another 7-day celebration, the Feast of the Tabernacles. And that was the celebration. Let's read verse 11, which is talking about the completion.
Thus Solomon finished the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all that came into Solomon's heart to make in the house of the Lord. And in his own house he prosperously effected.
Okay, so basically, the temple was a dwelling place for God. It was a sacred place. So this was a major accomplishment, a major project here, and this was set aside as a sacred place for true worship. And this is basically what our lesson is about. Solomon dedicates the temple, and we see that the temple it was accepted by God by coming down and filling the entire place, the entire sanctuary. And they had to celebrate for 7 days. That is, the altar dedication was a 7-day event, and it was completed. It was a dwelling place for God among his people. It was a sacred place for true worship. And this is our takeaway today, is it was a solemn place for true worship. And that's what it's just like most churches that I've been to several church dedication, and they call it church dedication. Basically, in essence, I guess they're saying this is a sacred place for true worship of God. It's a place that you can come and be in the presence of God. Not that to say this is the only place you could pray, but this was a sacred place, a place that you can come and into the presence of God, and God dwell there. Like I said, not that God won't hear you elsewhere, but this is a place set aside, sacred place for true worship of God. And that's really the essence of this lesson today. Now, the key verse, and we're pretty much done, okay. The key verse is verse 3. When the children saw the fire come down, they began to bow down in submission and worship God, because that this was a major feat, a major accomplishment here. And we always say that God wants to dwell among his people. And this is a place where God can dwell among his people. And as Solomon was praying for mercy, forgiveness, and guidance, and for whenever someone praying for God to hear, basically respond. Now, as you might say, well, God always hears. He always hears. But more so in a positive way. Respond in a positive way. And this is the thing. And we know we should always pray in his will. And it tells us don't pray for things to consume on your lust and all of that, that you're not guaranteed to receive from the Lord. Again, as I said, be careful what you pray for. They wanted a king. Israel wanted a king. God said, no, you don't need a king. I'm your king. We want a king. They got what they wanted. They got Saul, which was not a good king. So sometimes if you bug God enough, he might just give you what you ask for. Not necessarily what you need, but what you want. And that's our lesson today. Solomon dedicates the temple. Thank you.